shout. And please join me in the prayer of illumination. Faithful God, how blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Sanctify us by your word and spirit, so that we may glorify you in the company of the faithful. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Now, Pastor Ron.
Good morning, you all. Oh, I tell you what, we're short around the edges here this morning. I don't know who left me this little, it looks like a hot rod up here. I don't think it's mine, to tell you the truth. Today, or not today, but Thursday is Veterans Day, correct? Reason why I put the flag up and want to recognize our veterans. I think in the last few years especially, we've become to realize how important our veterans are and have been over the years. There was a time when I first got out of the Army, it was during the Vietnam War, and veterans were not necessarily recognized of any value at all. For a while, you just didn't talk about it, you just went on your way. But since then, we've come to realize that that was a serious mistake. And so, how many veterans do we have this morning? Veterans, put up your hands. I knew you would run, Gary. I know several of them who are not here are veterans, and I'm a veteran too. So you veterans, thank you. Okay? Thank you. I got my new Bible. Finally. Set this back at least once because it wasn't big enough. You know, I don't know what that's all about, but it wasn't big enough somehow. And so I got me another one and I like it. So if I make a mistake, it's not because it's a little print anymore. It's not just because I mess up, okay? Okay, Donna's already got to start with this. Oh, she's in there singing, I know. With the story, Widows Bite, you all heard that story throughout your lives, I'm sure. I'm going to do a little twist on it today, and I hope it works. 38 through 44. As he taught, he said, beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, who have best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses, and for the sake of appearance, they say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation. He sat down opposite the treasury and watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which are worth about a penny. Then he called his disciples and said to them, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty has put in everything she had, all the things she had to live on. I don't know about you, but I love to see when wealthy people give their money away. I think they have a responsibility at that point. It's been given to them, but they don't all recognize that. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't see their giving as anything sacrificial. They still have more money in their possessions than any of us will ever dream of. But still, it's quite a sight a few years back to see 168, whether you remember this or not, 168 billionaires, yes, that's billionaire with a B, worldwide line up with Bill Gates, the richest man in the world, and Warren Buffett, the second richest man in the world, to announce that they will give away at least half of their wealth by the time they die to help fund a wide variety of worthwhile causes. Any of you remember that? You made a big deal of it. Of course, you don't have to be a billionaire to make a declaration like that. I understand that actor Jackie Chan of Chinese Kung Fu movie fame has announced that he would give away half of his net worth. Unfortunately, his contribution is based on just a measly old $350 million. Hardly worth mentioning, but still, it's something, isn't it? I don't even understand those kind of figures when it comes to, One day, Jesus saw a group of wealthy men lining up to give a portion of their wealth to the temple. That's the story. They were making a big show of presenting their offerings. They wanted people to be aware of their charity. So they used large coins so that when the pieces of money fell into the box, an impressive clanging sound could be heard by all. Now, when I used to read that, I always thought, well, it's the size of the denomination that was what made it big. No, it was the size of the coin. It'd be like have a little copper penny, putting it in a box, and a silver dollar, and throwing it in. The difference. That was what was important. Of course, such demonstrations of public piety were not restricted to the 1st century A.D. Today, the wealthy love to see their names on libraries, press boxes, foundation scholarships offered by prestigious universities everywhere. We all know that. We've all seen it. Now, don't get me wrong. Society is better because of their generosity. But don't be misled. In most cases, these acts of generosity cost these wealthy donors very little, actually. They still have more than they could ever spend, more than we'll ever even be able to think about. Their situation is unlike that of the poor widow that Jesus observed quietly bringing her gift to present to God. This poor widow had only 2 coins, 2 tiny coins in her name. The widow's mite, as we call it, an offering with a value of about, and they say that not quite a penny. That's all she could possibly afford. That's all she had to offer. Because that's all she had. Probably no one else in the crowd even noticed her giving her offering. But Jesus did. He called together his disciples and said to them, that widow put more money in the treasury than anybody else, because they shared out of their abundance, but she gave all she had. Gave all she had. According to Jesus, her gift was more significant than Bill Gates or Warren Buffett's million, because God measures not how much you give, but how much you got left over. This poor widow loved God. She put her money where her heart was. She gave all she had, and Jesus praised her for it. Now, I want us to look very carefully at the actions of this widow this morning. Now, this is going to be a huge change for you once you start a sermon journey here that I preached many times before about the widow's mite. Now, first of all, her act of devotion was an indication that she had forgiven God. Now, before you accuse me of blasphemy or anything else, hear me out. This lady was a widow. She had lost her husband. Some of you have experienced that event, and you're wise enough to know that not only the hurt and loneliness that bring with it, but also the temptation to bitterness and anger. Some of you are familiar with the sensitive work of a psychiatrist named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, pioneer in near-death studies, who herself died just a few years ago. In 1969, she was the author of a groundbreaking book titled On Death and Dying. Now, if you've lost someone, this might be a good chance for you to listen to this. I think it's significant. It was in that book in which she first described the 5 stages of grief. You've heard that. Grief for most people is an ongoing process that must be overcome one step at a time. The 5 stages which Dr. Ross described are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. They provide a framework that helps us to go on living after we lose someone we love. And all of us have lost someone we love. All of us. Now, some people with great faith can handle these stages fairly easily. Others sometimes become bogged down in one of these stages of grief and never really come out on the other side. Now, we don't have time to deal with each of these steps, but consider for a moment that 3rd step. Anger. It's not unusual, you see, for a person who has loved someone and that person has died to be angry, first of all, at the one who has died. Can you believe that? How can you leave me in this situation? You feel like it's also not unusual for that person to be angry at themselves. Oh, if I had just done this thing differently, maybe he'd still be around. It's my fault to some degree. And finally, it's not unusual in that situation to be angry with God. Why didn't God spare him? If God can do anything, he's supposed to be able to. Why didn't he spare my loved one? He was a good person, or she. did they spare them? None of us can deal very well with the idea of losing someone we love. Even though we know God has prepared a place for our loved ones with Him that is far more perfect than our existence here will ever be, it is still difficult to let go. There's a really neat story about a man who was walking down the road. He saw a young boy up in a tree straddling a limb. He noticed the boy had a leaf in his hand and some string. He was trying to tie a leaf back on a twig of the tree. He asked the young fellow what he was doing. The young boy replied that his sister was very, very ill. She was near death, and the doctor had told his family that before the last leaf shall fall from the trees in the front yard, she will be gone. The boy didn't want her to die, so he was tying the leaves back on the trees, perhaps to spare his sister's life. None of us can deal very well with the idea of losing someone we love. None of us. When that event does occur, it takes time for the healing to take place. And one of the obstacles to healing may be our resentment toward God. The first thing that this widow may have been saying as she dropped her coin, 2 coins in the temple treasury, is, I've finally come to grips with my grief. I'm over my resentment. I'm at peace with God. And there's a second thing that we would have been saying as she dropped in those 2 coins. It was this: I trust God. You see, there was no Social Security back then, no pensions, no monthly checks she would be receiving now that her husband was gone. She was on her own. Unless her husband was a wealthy man, or unless she had children to support her, or perhaps her other family members that would take her in, she was at the mercy of sometimes a very heartless society. It was not a good situation. Jesus indicated her poverty when he said that those 2 coins were all that she had. And she gave all she had. She must have done it trusting God would provide for her with her daily bread, and it was a tremendous amount of trust. So she was saying, I trust God. I forgive Him, and I trust Him. The late United Methodist Bishop Charles Golden told of visiting a mission school in India one time, and where a student sang an African American spirit. Some of you may remember. I remember vaguely. They sang it to him as a courtesy, he said, because he's a black man. What they sang was, I got shoes. Remember, if I remember that song, I got shoes. Bishop Gould said he suddenly realized that these children who were singing that old spiritual about having shoes were all barefooted. It reminded him that when his people had composed that song that they sang, they too were barefooted. Were singing out of a hope and trust, for they knew there were shoes laid up in heaven for them. Remember how those song goes? Anybody? I got shoes, you got shoes, all of my children got shoes. When I get to heaven, I'm going to put on my shoes and walk over God's heaven. I may be barefoot now, this lady was saying. I may be barefoot now. This may be my last 2 coins, but I'm dropping them into the temple treasure because God will provide. Maybe have been the widow's way of saying, I know God will provide for me. His will had forgiven God, she trusted God. Oh, that we could trust as much as she did, you and I. If we could just trust like that, what a difference our lives would be. And here's the final thing her offering may have said that day. She believed in the work of God. She believed in the work. The work of the temple was important to her, and she wanted to support it. It's simple. She wanted to put God first in her life. Doug Sherman and William Hendricks tells about a man of their acquaintance who owns a especially lucrative business. And several years ago, he and his wife went to see a strategic planner to help them chart their course for the rest of their lives. I didn't know it wasn't. For a better part of the morning, the consultant listened to them talk about themselves, their goals, aspirations, and what they wanted out of life. Finally, the consultant took out a piece of blank paper and drew a small box at the top of the paper. Out to the side, he wrote 2 words: Jesus and money. Then he looked at the couple and said, "From what you told me this morning, there are 2 major forces that have power in your life up to now. 2 forces. But as I see it, you're at a point where one or the other has to get priority. Now you tell me which one of these words to put in the box, and I'll tell you how to map out a strategy. If you want Jesus in the box, fine, I'll show you how you can organize your life around him. If you want money, I can show you how to do that. Which word do you want in the box?" Now, according to my friend, that room was quiet for about some time. The couple didn't say a word to each other. The fact was, they didn't need to. They realized that they had come to a fork in the road where they were going to have to decide which agenda mattered: financial interests of their business or their commitment to Christ. We're told the couple chose to put Jesus in the box. By their own testimony, it made a profound difference in the course of their lives ever since. I wonder, which word would you have put in the box? Jesus or money? This widow spent her last 2 coins on the work of God rather than on herself. Tough choice. Robert Schnazzy, I think they pronounce that way, wrote a book which he titled 5 Practices of a Fruitful Congregation. I want to read you a few lines from the book. Listen to this. All of us, listen to this. Every sanctuary and chapel in which we have worshipped, every organ that has lifted our spirits, every pew where we have sat, every communion rail where we have knelt, every hymnal from which we have sung, every praise band that has touched our hearts, every church classroom where we have gathered with our friends, every church kitchen that has prepared our meals, every church band that has taken us to camp, every church cabin where we have slept, are all the fruit of someone's extravagant generosity. Someone who has gone before us. We have been the recipients of grace upon grace. We are the heirs, the beneficiaries of those who have come before us, who were touched by the generosity of Christ enough to give graciously so that we can experience the truth of Christ for ourselves. We owe the same to generations to come, he said. So do we. If we don't, who will? See, it's up to us. I don't know how long this church is going to be here. It'll be here only if there are people who are willing to make it be here and support it through their lives. Now, doubtless it was with pleasure that this widow dropped in her coins, for she knew she was part of something bigger than herself. That's true whether we are giving to God or whether we are helping some of our God's children. Final story. A certain woman lost her husband, and she was having difficulty moving through the stages of grief that I talked about. For weeks she had went each day to the cemetery to put flowers on his grave. She simply couldn't let go. No matter what she did, it seemed that her grief would not dissipate. In her despair, she went to her doctor for a checkup. When she told him about taking the flowers each day to the cemetery, her doctor made a gentle suggestion. He said, instead of taking flowers to the cemetery, let me suggest to you take them to the hospital. I have 2 patients who are alone. They have no family in Witness City, and they would really enjoy receiving some fresh flowers. Why not take those fresh flowers just do it for one day to the hospital rather than the cemetery? Ask them about their progress and give them some encouragement. See if there's anything you can do for them. That's what he said. The lady took the doctor's suggestion. She took the flowers to the hospital rather than the cemetery. And soon she was able to work through her grief. You have no idea how many times I've seen that happen. Just like that. Those coins dropped into the temple treasure that day may have been an important part of this widow's recovery from her grief experience. By dropping in those coins, she realized she was a part of something bigger than herself. She was participating in God's work on earth. No wonder Jesus was pleased to see her make her offering. No wonder he praised her to his disciples. She had been victorious over grief, you see. Trusted God, her daily bread, and she was involved in the ongoing work of the kingdom. That will change anybody's life. In fact, in God's eyes, this poor widow gave him more than Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, and Jackie Chan all put together. Those two little coins. Let's pray. Father, each one of us, I mean that sincerely, Lord, I really do. Each one of us has gifts to give. Something we can do that will further your kingdom and help your people. Show us what that is in our lives. And then help us to have the courage and strength to just do it. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.